Hello and welcome to our last session of today's Leader Talk, L&D's role in building skills-based organizations, sponsored by Bridge, ELB Learning, GP Strategies, Interplay Learning, and Intrepid by Vital Source. So I'm again Liz Spate, the events marketing specialist here at Training Industry, and I'm thrilled to have you with us here today. So before we get started, I would like to quickly go over a few housekeeping items to help you interact with our speaker and get the most out of today's session. So throughout today's event, please feel free to use that chat for any comments and submit those questions in the Q&A panel. All of our questions will be addressed during the event and at the end of the program during the Q&A section. At your end of your time with us, you'll notice a short survey has popped open in your browser, and we would appreciate your thoughts on today's event. And all of our sessions are being recorded and archived on trainingindustry.com, and you will receive a follow-up email from us to the link to the on-demand session. If this is your first Training Industry event, we would love to welcome you. Training Industry exists to connect among learning and development professionals. We offer tons and tons of resources like live events like today's Leader Talk, as well as through articles on our website, our magazine, conferences, research reports, and our podcast. And as always, we would also love to hear about what you've learned from today's session on social media. So please follow any of our platforms of your choice as you share your favorite takeaways with your colleagues. Without further ado, we have the squad, the amazing squad. We have Ellen Burns-Johnson, the VP of Learning Strategies. We have Scott Provence, the VP of Integrated Learning Service. And then we have Josh Penzell, VP of AI Innovations and Solutions, all from ELB Learning. Take it away, guys.
Thanks for the introduction, Liz. All right, so we're going to grab the screen share and get things going for today. Let's see if I can do it well. This will stop other screen sharing. Yes, I do. I do want to continue. Okay. Can everyone see beyond buzzwords?
Good.
All right. Okay. So I am going to work on getting my camera back or my video feed back in a moment. But for now, just to get us kicked off, so we're the last session of today. I'm hoping that all of you who've been able to attend multiple sessions today have been finding them valuable. Great, you can see me on video. Fantastic. Okay, I'm just going to keep going then. So today what we'd like to do with the three of us here, Josh and Scott and myself, we're going to run sort of a panelist conversation. So I'm going to kind of step in as moderator, and we're going to hear from our big, beautiful brains, Scott and Josh, and I will chime in as well about L&D's role within driving skills-based organizations, but I want to really take it back to fundamentals. And so that's kind of where we're going to be looking today. Before we really dive into it, just to give you some background, from my part, Liz introduced me as the VP of Learning Strategy at ELB Learning. So my role is to help our customers and help our organization think about what programs and structures work within the L&D departments to serve organizations strategically in their organizational goals. I'm going to pass the mic over to Scott next to do a little bit of an introduction on what he does at ELB Learning and what his history has been. Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah. Thanks for the intro. It's great to meet everyone. Looking forward to the conversations today. I work closely with Ellen and Josh. My role is kind of in connecting a lot of the dots. So how do we integrate our products and services and approach things from a consultative standpoint? So working with a lot of clients to act as their thought partner in getting initiatives measured, successful, out the door, all of those things. And take it away, Josh.
Thank you very much, Scott. My name is Josh Penzell. I'm the VP of AI Services, Strategy, Innovation here at ELB Learning. I've led teams at Zillow, Amazon. I can't say her name because she'll yell at me, Skillsoft, and now here at ELB Learning. I do have a former career as a musical theater director, which has led me to be really, forward thinking in this whole AI change management space, and specifically what kind of skills do we need to be taking on, especially given the rapid change and transformation of this entire the entire paradigm, perhaps, Ellen?
The whole
I think is
world?
what we're talking about. The whole world. Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm not being broad enough.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I think that, and we'll get into this a little bit more, but the topic of accelerating rates of change within business, it's been a topic for, 20 years, more than that. But it doesn't go away because the pace of change just keeps accelerating. And certainly we have some specific things to talk about in terms of how the next few years look. But that is really, I think, very fundamentally related to why people are talking about a skills-based organization as a concept and as a goal at this point in time. Before we jump into our first topic, I just want to mention that, with ELB Learning, we work with a lot of really big, high-performing organizations, and that means we get to see behind the scenes in a lot of those organizations. So today, what we're sharing comes from our insights in working with those leading high-performance organizations, as well as smaller firms, but then also recent studies and industry publications. So if you're interested in getting a little bit more of the history behind what we're saying, or getting links to specific resources, we'll share our contact info towards the end of the hour, and you can reach out to get some of that material if you'd like. Okay, so before I let Josh and Scott completely loose to talk about the topics of the day, we'd all like to know a little bit about where you're coming from. So we have a poll to launch for you. And this poll is just to ask everyone, where is your organization on the skills ecosystem journey? So if we think about the ecosystem journey as, all right, we've been thinking about roles and we want to move to something that's more skills oriented across the organization, where are we as a group? So there should be a poll panel on your screen right now with a few options. Pick the one that's best. It's not a really robust poll. We're just trying to get a sense of where you are, so we can know kind of how to tailor our thinking for the rest of the session.
And that's not that's not a mistake. That's a joke. Choice 5, just in case.
Yeah.
I don't want anyone typing in there, there was an issue, right? So, yeah, Casey knows what I'm saying.
Choice 5 means whatever it means
Yeah,
to you.
it means it means one person. That's what it means.
Nice.
It's the end of the day. Anyway. Okay, great. So we've got, I don't know, I mean, Scott and Josh, this is more of a spread than I expected. We've got some people who are kind of at the skills what stage, but some people who are kind of in the middle of a plan transformation as well. What's your reaction to these results?
My reaction, I think Scott's going to say the same thing. Perfect bell curve, maybe.
Yeah,
looks like it.
So this is exactly what we would expect, actually.
Yeah.
Right.
Cool.
So that tells me that everyone is where they should be overall, right? And it also shows everyone that there's still a lot of places to go, but that as soon as we move, right, the bell curve moves along too. So that's the funny thing about this discussion is it's not just a one-time, one and done thing. It's like with our training, it's not a one and done thing. It's a cycle, right?
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's the kind of.
I didn't, Valerie, by the way. Nothing less than perfection from y'all. Sorry.
Really is.
Okay, so it's good to get that context as far as where we are all coming from today. We are going to talk about, I think, the many different things in 3 broad categories. First thing we want to start with is just kind of framing and reframing the topic of a skills-based organization. So what does it mean really? When should organizations consider it? We're just trying to make sure that we're all using terms the same way. We're then going to move into a conversation about alignment. So when you're thinking about moving forward with your existing transformation or jumping into a transformation with both feet, or maybe you're just trying to figure out if this is a pool you even want to swim in, are you making your decisions for the right reasons? Do you really understand what that kind of transformation is going to enable for your organization? That's going to be the second part of our conversation. And then the third part of our conversation is, once you started swimming, how do you maintain that momentum? How do you make sure that you continue to realign and make sure everyone's, moving in the same direction? We're going to take questions throughout the session, kind of here and there, but we'll also try to end with a little bit of time at the end of the session so that we can really dig into any questions that you are able to pop up. You can put those in the chat. You can put them in the Q&A panel. We'll take some live notes to make sure that we're doing our best to keep track of the things that you want us to cover. So
Ellen,
if you
and
have,
perhaps
yeah,
it's worth adding, right?
Mhm.
These chats, I don't know if everyone who's been on these can serve as almost that fourth panel member, right? I mean, sometimes you're getting better ideas out of the chats than you are from us,
for sure.
which I think is great. So I would just encourage everyone to just go wild in whatever way they want into the chat, right? Responding. It should be a little messy, I think. And we're
Mhm.
here to provide that constant spark, right? And that also means that maybe putting questions that you have specifically in the Q&A area will ensure that we will, address them.
Light
But
that
I
spark.
think,
Yeah,
but I think just about reframing is an important thing, right? Like, what do we do? We like as learning and development professionals, we are lighting the spark.
Mhm.
That is essentially our job, is to make sure that when the candle's getting low or when the fire's about to get out, right? We're the ones who provide that motivation. We're the ones who provide the guidelines, but they have to light the candle, right? They have to do the work. They have to tend to the garden, to switch metaphors. And
Mhm.
so I just think that's an important, as we're talking about framing and reframing, and I know Scott, you'll say more about this. That's an important shift, right? And so even this environment, it's not one way. We need to reframe what we're doing here.
Yeah,
I'm
and before we jump in, sorry, Scott, just to cut you off for 1 second. A question for Liz. Are we going to be able to send the chat log out with the recording links after the sessions are complete?
I'm 99% sure, yes.
Okay. That sounds good. Because one of the things that I think I've seen with webinar attendees is you take that chat log, you plop it into Chat GPT or your favored LLM, you give the agent some constraints, and now you have a webinar partner that continues the conversation even though the session has ended.
We'll make
Okay.
sure that everyone gets in keeping. We'll make sure everyone has a AI assistant they can talk to after this, and we'll make sure it has all the stuff in it. We'll work with them to do this. But we're already jumping, so I think maybe we should reframe, Scott and
Yeah.
Ellen.
Yeah, I'm already liking the conversation happening in the chat with, okay, I've got an interest or maybe even some funding for my department to explore skills taxonomy. Do I build it? Do I buy it? Do I use AI to augment it? And yeah, it's starting to kind of filter in the chat. But one of my roles that I know Ellen and Josh and I really like to play for each other is devil's advocate. So to kind of healthily push back in the kind of panel nature here, what happens if I don't do anything? What's the risk? What's the ROI? Kind of healthily pushing back on our own initiatives, even of what do I expect to get out of a skills taxonomy? If I told you that I had a skills taxonomy right here in my drawer that's perfect for your org, what would you expect it to do? What would good look like in 6 months or a year? When we're thinking about framing this whole conversation, what do we expect when we talk about implementing a skills-based model? What does success look like?
Yeah, so maybe what we can do here before we go to some of those bigger questions is just share what our perspective is on a skills-based model. So we've, lots of buzzwords talked about today, but also in the industry overall. We've got upskilling, reskilling, we've got the future of work. I think the term ecosystem is also one that comes up when we're talking about this. We've got taxonomies and ontologies. So let's maybe start with the basics. What do you think it actually means when we talk about an organization pivoting to a skills-based model or creating a skills-based organization? What are we actually talking about there? What functionally changes?
I'd like to even take us a step back, which is like, why
Please.
are we doing it?
Mm-hmm.
Because let's be honest, every 15, 20 years, we're doing another thing. And I think we're at a cool inflection point. The reason we're trying to do these skills taxonomies is because we realize there's a different way to sort of effectively match individuals with skills, with tasks, right? We see this vision of people aren't in roles, right? That they're sort of able to execute on certain skills and do stuff. But to do that, we're sort of still having to define those skills. in very specific buckets and define the job roles in very specific buckets, right? And that's how we're looking at this problem, is sort of with these finite, let's say, amount of buckets that we can sort of put a finite description on, right? And I think, and I'm not saying this is going to happen overnight, but I think something is shifting in the world. AI, the generative AI thing and the large language models, I think, are a good example of it, and maybe it's all predicated on that. Language is inherently individual, right? And the way I define skills, the way we do different skills, execute, these are all individual, very individual things. And I'm wondering now if, as we look at this defining, right, if we need to think somewhat a little more fungibly about it, because it's not, to me, about trying to define everyone within a finite amount of stuff. It's more about, how do I, now that I can have everyone doing all these things, right? In AI, just think about the unlimited opportunities. How then do I look at what they're doing, right? And try to match that with the value I can provide. And to me, it's less about skills. It's more about this. It's going to go towards this relationship concept, right? And so the reason I'm saying that is, when we think about build or buy, one of the important things is to make sure that no matter what we're doing, we're thinking about this in a fungible way that can change, right? That we're still working on these sort of fundamental truths, whatever those are.
So Scott,
Yeah.
Josh, what I'm hearing from you, and then I'm going to pass the microphone to Scott to kind of respond. What I'm hearing from you, Josh, is part of the reason that the conversation is centering or moving in bulk towards skills-based organizations is that the idea of a skills-based organization is more flexible than kind of the more role-centric models
Yes.
of managing people in the past. But based on what you're saying are the trends, the getting too locked into a specific skills framework might also just recreate the same kind of rigidity. And so that's something we need to be careful about. Did I summarize that correctly?
I think you did a much better job. I'm Polonius, and brevity is the soul of wits, right? So I think you did a much better job of capturing that than I probably said it. But as we're thinking about today, the goal is to personalize the experience and match better. And that is the outcome. Skills-based is the way we're getting to it now, but let's not forget the outcome is this, and that skills might not be the only way to get there, and we might need to continue revisiting it. So, yeah, Scott,
what do you want to add on to that? Devil's advocate.
Yeah, and actually, ironically, I have no devil's advocacy to advocate for here, because I totally agree, and I would even. I mean, you can step even 2 or 3 steps further back into history and recognize this evolution from 20th century factory line work. You are step 5 in the widget making process to we are moving into 21st century knowledge work. We have this, latest, cognitive revolution that's happening, and so much of our jobs now are moving from I'm measuring your proficiency in how fast you can make X number of widgets an hour to creative thinking. I mean, we almost front and center in almost every skills taxonomy I see are things like problem solving, communication. Like these are skills that are not measured by number of teeth in a widget, but all of a sudden is putting much more pressure on. Are we all in agreement with what creative problem solving means? And I think certainly the dimension of AI and large language models specifically puts even more pressure on the clarity and consistency in our own languages. And I would argue that we don't have a single definition for what it means to embody critical thinking or problem solving or creativity in the workplace or communication. And those are absolutely central to a skills taxonomy. So, kind of long way of saying, I guess, maybe one of the first steps you need to do in your team and your organization is get clear on what do some of those terms mean to us? How do we see them? What do they look like? How how are we training any models that we're using to understand something as broad as critical thinking? Those are all really important conversations to have.
I would just add, first of all, I don't like the term devil's advocate because it makes it seem like a bad thing. And the fact of the matter is, more discussion and argument is exactly what we need. There is a term that's called argument for the sake of heaven. So I'll use that one. I'll just say that what we're also battling with, and I think someone's asking critical thinking a competency or skill and all this stuff, but either way, we cannot, how much do you want to control it? I think is a question. Like, how much can you define it is a question. And where do you start to find that balance between the need for control and the ability to provide space? And I know that sounds a little whatever, but as I think about this with my working with generative AI, if you tell me how to use it or you put it boxes around it, you're limiting my ability to make creative use of it. So I'm just gonna not use that, right? So sometimes I wonder, as we think about these experiences, learning, change management, skills, how do we create these in such a way that we're not just playing to a denominator, but are actually constructing them in a way that allow them to evolve in some ways and be fungible to each person, right? It almost feels like we have to be more concerned with how I get to the outcomes, right? And it's almost like an exploration of skills. I'm just thinking out loud. I don't know what I would call like the acting training I received, right? Like, I don't know, I wouldn't call it training. I don't know if I would call it metacognitive thinking. I don't know, but there's something in that different way of approaching stuff. And I don't know what we call that, or if it's limited to a skill or whatever.
Yeah.
But that's the challenge, is we have to do this. And yet I also want to keep in mind, like, the reason we're putting frames around skills is because we currently know no better way. But maybe we will in a year,
Yeah.
right? Maybe we can get more concrete data. And instead of looking at, I have 50 skills, you don't even have to look at the skills, right? You just take the jobs that are being done, you take the people, and there's a new thing that connects them, that we have relationship scoring. I have no clue, right? So, yeah.
I think we're going to come back to that too, because we're talking later in the session about, alignment and also momentum. And I think that's going to come back into that conversation. For now, though, I kind of want to pivot to something that Monica brought up. And Kelly, I think, did a really great job of kind of summarizing the questions that come up when you're thinking about a skills-based model. Monica was asking specifically about critical thinking as a competency or a skill. And so what I'd like to do next is just a really quick exercise in the chat. This is an exercise that Scott put together. So Scott, if you'd like to lead us through it, I will click next on the slides. But let's, do you want to introduce us to what you got here?
Yeah, this, like, I suppose goes back to this kind of concept of, are we aligned with our definitions? And be curious to see, I would hope, and certainly encourage people as they enter these in the chat to not be afraid to get things wrong, and to kind of, I want to see some pressure points of like where we may be getting fuzzy in our definitions, and certainly take this to your, or some version of it to your own organization, and figure out, to Kelly's point, are we defining skills-based model the same way? Are we defining positions the same way? Is position the same as job? Is, what are all these things? And, do we have consistency there? Because if we don't, as a core L&D group or C-suite or whatever, how do we expect something like a large language model or a workforce to have the same definitions? Mm-hmm. So the fill in the blank activity is we kind of go this one at a time. I'll give you 30 seconds to look at the whole thing, but let's just put in the chat one fill in the blank guess at a time. So you can see all of the words that you have available to you. You can see the 6 blanks and kind of how they're spaced out. But let's see what we got for a vote for this first blank. We're going to see if there's some kind of crowd bias going on, if anyone's willing to vote against this. Okay. We have a couple people making things up. Okay, mostly job, but yeah, potentially role. People saying I'd say role instead of job, and then a few voting for skills. So skill of software developer, job, role, software developer. Okay, let's go to the second one. So job of a software developer is typically, and again, you can see great role there. So second vote, developers' effectiveness hinges not on performing a discrete blank, discrete task, discrete skill. So something like writing code, debugging programs, is that a skill? Is that a task? Not one way or another, but kind of curious to see for yourself and maybe for your own team how you would vote for that. All right, let's go to the next one. Let's see, discrete task is how we typically defined it, and demonstrating specific blank. So how is writing code different from a proficiency in Java or a knowledge of version control? Now we've got a really interesting blend here. I'm seeing skills and competencies. Again, think about the evolution of our own terminologies here. We had some almost 100% agreement, and now we're starting to get very fuzzy. How is skills different from competencies? I think we're 50-50 maybe. Let's reveal the next one here. So task in demonstrating a specific skills like proficiency in Java or knowledge of version control, but even then broader than that, a cohesive blend of knowledge, behaviors, and attitudes. Is that competency? Is that taxonomy? All right, now we're a little bit, now that I think maybe by process of elimination, a little bit more, yeah, there we go. And even we have it in the chat. Skills are more specific, competencies are more broad. Yeah, so let's go to the next one there. So broader competencies. And now we have these last two. Broad, so this next blank here, software developers' work might classify into broad categories like design or implementation or testing. Is that an ontology? Is that a taxonomy? Back to a job, maybe? My job is I'm a software developer, tester, I'm a deployer. Taxonomy. Okay, good. And then process of elimination. You don't even have to vote if you don't want. Yeah. Ontology. So in comparison to a taxonomy, which is a little bit more straightforward, this is a classification process. Taxonomy is trying to capture and show the causal links between those more nuanced definitions, competency, skills, tasks. So not only is it classifying on one system, but it is trying to classify across multiple systems. How do skills and tasks that maybe are part of positions that don't even relate to each other connect? I think it's interesting that probably the biggest differences we had were between skills and competencies, just for this specific group. And again, use it for your own team, or use something like this for your own team if you are starting to notice a struggle in, oh, we need a skills model, or we need a competency framework, or we need a better promotion path. Okay, let's talk about what those actually mean, and if we've got alignment or not. And yeah, interesting. I didn't even see the option. Hey, if you didn't see the option at the top and you were still filling out most of those words, good for you. I think you win the ultimate prize here.
Extra points.
Yeah.
Extra webinar points.
Exactly. Does the difference really matter that in the ontology world? I've opened that up to the group. Yeah. So I would argue that yes, potentially, but I think it's worth, that question by itself is even worth thinking about. If I'm trying to implement an ontology, do I need to differentiate between what is my core set of competencies versus skills versus tasks?
Where would you put something like, and I'm curious, I hear this one a lot, emotional intelligence, engagement. I'm even curious where you would put, I don't know, metacognitive learning. Is that are those skills or are those competencies? I'm just curious how you would define this.
Yeah. I typically see, just like people were saying in the chat, competencies as broader than, what's kind of nice about this is you can almost, I'd maybe cut out jobs from this, but I would see almost this nesting dolls, right? Tasks, then skills, then competencies. So I would put competencies at the broadest sense because that definition, the way I have seen it used and use it in consulting, is with that kind of blend of knowledge and behaviors and attitudes. And I would say skills, again, if you think of the KSA model, like skills is kind of a subsegment of that. Yeah, and I'm seeing the chat here. Competency is the ability to see beyond the skill, how the skill impacts.
Yeah, I'm thinking about it from, and I don't think I shared this, I'm one of the 15% of autistic individuals who can keep a job, at least for a bit, right? Which, by the way, means there's a lot of us out there you could hire. And I'm thinking about, I think about emotional intelligence, I think in a different way than some people, because I'm looking for much more observable or measurable things that I can't, that are
Mhm.
not feelable. And so, for me, it's just interesting. I'm exploring in my head where the difference is between a skill and a competency. Because I can see EI as obviously it's a, I mean, I sort of knew the question when I asked it, knew the answer, but the set of skills beneath it for me are very different from, I think, the skills someone else would teach.
Mhm.
And what I would be more interested in is what is it you need me to be able to do? You need to be able to tell someone is feeling this. You need me to be able to, right? Because the way I'm going to judge that is very different from the way you may judge it. And I have to almost um, I have to figure out where I am in relation to the norm at the moment in order to then backwards engineer. Does that make
Mhm.
sense? My wife is a like a beer sommelier, advanced cicerone, a beer judge, and she says there's certain flavors she can't taste,
Hmm.
right? So she has to use, or she tastes them differently from what the common is. So
Mhm.
she has to use other techniques to back into that so that she can do her job.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so that's just one thing also I think is difficult when I look at some of this is in my head, I sometimes find some of these either more or yes, less useful,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because the way they're packaged, which gets into my point, the way you might package a competency might be different from the way I would package a competency,
I
right?
think like Tanya's point about, yeah, we want to, the specificity of definitions is super important, especially if you're talking about building or buying a model, like any sort of model, you're buying these core definitions. So the specificity
Yes.
is important. And on the other hand, to your point, like if you get so caught up in the nuance, like it's going to fall under, collapse under its own weight.
Mhm.
So I think that's super important. Ellen, I
I,
like,
it's,
that aren't following the chat, I like Ellen's point there about she did a great example of kind of this breakdown of competency, skill, task as a specific example. So resolving an issue brought in by a frustrated customer, good time bound specific task. Doing that over a longer period of time would develop a skill of I can recognize facial expressions, or if I'm a customer service over the phone, I can recognize tone of voice. These are skills that are built up over repeated time. Emotional intelligence is more of a competency. And I think one other way you can define those three is the first was specifically time bound and solved in, with a specific instance. The second is more built up over time and can be measured through a longer longitudinal assessment. So Ellen is a really good customer resolutions expert because she has the skill of constantly being able to recognize emotional states. That's something I can test with 90% accuracy. She can do X,
Mhm.
Y, and Z. A competency does not have necessarily a endpoint. So I didn't reach my 90% threshold. I didn't resolve that one customer's issue. Emotional intelligence is ongoing. Like there's never a ultimate point for critical thinking or emotional
I,
intelligence, how I would define those.
yeah, I think that's maybe where I get caught up, and I'd love to explore that more in my brain,
Yeah.
versus other people's. But the
Yeah.
one thing I just wanted to add
And
is,
then
and
we're
this
gonna
has
move
nothing to
on.
do with
Go ahead.
this,
Mhm.
yeah, is there's a new build or buy, right? Because of how the pace of change and the availability now of unlimited resources via generative AI or very cheap resources, I do think enablement, right? And like internal, you can do a lot more.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily build because I don't have to build a solution for everyone. It's not buy because I don't have to buy a solution that someone else made that I'm going to use for everyone. It's a third. I've been calling it enable. I don't think it's great, but it's sort of like enabling everyone else to use all that stuff and figure out and create a framework within that. I
Right.
think
Okay.
that's going to be it's going to be more in the future because like why buy a
Yeah.
product when I can build it myself on AI and build it just for me? But nonetheless, just something to think about in the future.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's actually a really good segue to our kind of section two, which is, what's the, getting that alignment. So we kind of started to experience this a little bit through that exercise that Scott led us through. We've kicked off this conversation about skills versus competencies and tasks and so on and so forth. What I'm hearing from you, Josh, just to bring us back to an earlier point is let's not get too weighed down on it. It's useful to have distinctions between those terms, but it's most useful if those distinctions are very specific to your organization, and you can get really specific these days. So,
or to the individual.
or even to the individual, right? Okay, so with that in mind, and just we're not going to lock in definitions on skills versus competencies and things today, because that's not our point. But let's talk about a little bit. I'm asking everyone to kind of answer in chat. What would a skills-based framework enable for your organization? If you are able to get alignment and you are able to get people kind of using these definitions within your organization and individually a little bit more, what does that unlock for your organization? And Scott, let's have you maybe vamp on this for a minute or so while people are using the chat.
Yeah. Well, I love just at least the way it showed up in my chat. I just got sandwiched between two chats about benefits of internal mobility and accountability and development. So, and I'm seeing a few more of those, mobility, development, a lot of those things. I think that having, when I'm not kind of doing that devil's advocate, or forget already, Josh,
We'll say you're arguing for the sake
arguing
of
for
the
the sake.
group.
Yeah.
When I'm not inhabiting that role, I think the biggest benefit I see to skills-based framework is that it does unlock more of that internal mobility. Even and obviously way more important than some talking head on a webinar or a bunch of values painted on your company wall. When I see this most in action, and I've felt very lucky to be in a couple of different orgs that have done this. I see this most in action when the big boss comes down and says, "Hey, what title best fits you right now? I see all the stuff that you're doing right now. I don't, your title's kind of irrelevant because what you're doing matters the most. So what title do you want? You want to be a director of such and such, and you want to be a lead of this specific and that idea that specific boss was embodying the skills-based framework such to the point of like, look, your role in the official capacity doesn't even matter. I'm acknowledging you for what you're bringing to the organization in terms of your skills. And so that's the kind of mobility and freedom that I want to see happen in every organization is, look, your titles, whatever. I want to acknowledge what you're doing here.
I really like what Carissa just said, stronger buy-in to how individual roles help the greater organization. But the reason I like that is from the individual perspective. Right? Like one thing I'm seeing in here and I'm thinking, perhaps arguing for the sake of heaven, is why do I need a skills-based framework to do this? And I don't mean that we haven't needed one, but now I'm thinking in the future, do I need one? Right? And I'm not saying get rid of it, but that's where I'm playing is what the opportunity is. And I'm wondering if there's an opportunity then to think about what Chris is saying, which is instead of, whatever, it's really about providing the individual what they need so that they can. And I remember, if anyone remember, Telling Ain't Training, like fabulous book, right? We all read hopefully 15, 20 years ago. But I'll always remember Dr. Kosta, whatever, right, said something I always remember, which was like the effectiveness of learning, or, really has to do with three things. Motivation, the ability to learn, which is metacognition, and prior knowledge. Like these are the three facets that are going to determine a bunch of stuff and you design around. And so I always think about that first one. And I think, if the goal of our skills-based organization is in the end, right, to get more buy-in from our individual contributors, then they'll tell us what skills they need to learn, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they'll sort of lead us down what paths they need. And we might even discover there were skills we didn't realize were skills, or competencies we didn't even realize we had internally. And that's part of, I think, this bottom-up approach I keep thinking about, which is, should we be spending less time creating the skills taxonomy and more time figuring out how to go to the managers and the front line, right? And sort of enable them at scale to implement their own, whatever that could look like, right? But I do think it gets to this alignment thing, which is like, in the end, what is it you're trying to accomplish?
Mm-hmm.
And it might be the skills-based framework and the way you're using it, right? And you have Workday and Microsoft and it's loading in there, and like that is going to get you there. It might also be like, whoa, I can rethink this, or I don't have to answer all these questions.
Mm-hmm.
Can I also say, you say job roles, it's like
Oh, I think Josh cut
actors
out.
are following
Oh,
scripts.
mhm.
We're starting
Josh,
to
are you
lose.
there? Yeah, I think we might have cut out for a little bit. So while Josh is working on getting back on mic, so I wanted to kind of evolve this conversation just for a minute. Um, we talked about alignment. We talked about, the various reasons why an organization might go into a skills-based model. I know we don't have a ton of time left, and we do want to just kind of talk about maintaining enthusiasm for the change before we wrap up. I do want to ask you both, Josh and Scott, what's L&D's role in this? Not to make a pun, but if we're in the L&D part of an organization, and we're looking at an organization considering this, whether we're the ones leading it or not, maybe we should be the ones leading it, but why? What is our role in this kind of transformation and getting an organization to think about this sort of evolution?
Yeah, I think especially, I mean, I know that L&D and HR often are working hand in glove, or kind of subset of one over the other, typically one more than the other, and how I've seen it often set up. But if HR is often having to work within this rubric of kind of a prior existing formalized job structure, or for the Josh and I, have got these big companies like Google and like, you got to work through, you're coming in at a level 4 and you need to get up to level 10 at the end, or this more formalized promotion career development path. I certainly see L&D's role as trying to not break that mold, but to try and augment it, or turn it from a one-dimensional path of, oh, you just got to go through your twice a year performance reviews and kind of work your way up the ladder into what are all of the other dimensions we want to unlock for you. So, and that can be, as formulaic as these badges and courses that you're formally taking through our LMS or our course systems, but hopefully a lot more open-ended than that even. So tell me what books that you're reading right now, or what actions you've taken within your own department group to do some 20% projects, or to lead some potential new initiatives, and how can we reverse engineer some of the learning that's taken place with that. So it's not even that you have to go through a formalized training process, but that we're just helping you document some of that combination of motivation and metacognition and knowledge that you're developing.
Yeah.
Oh, are you back, Josh? Go ahead.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Good. Sorry about that. Yeah, that was probably a good cutoff because I was going off. I agree with everything Scott said. I guess for me, there's something the alignment is going to have to be kind of from the bottom up from now on, not the top down. And as a result, L&D's role is going to be that connection to the humans. If I'm using a theater metaphor, which I often do, we're the theater directors. They're going to be in front of the audience who's the performance, but our job is to help them make sure that by the time they do that, they're coming across perfectly, and we're not going to be there when they do, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that means finding what each single individual actor needs to perform on that day. And that means, by the way, if we're talking about momentum, it's less thinking about the ways you get there or the skills even, but what is the outcome? Like, what is it I want to achieve? Because the way I want to do that is going to be slightly different from you, right? That's like if you think about sales processes, we put those processes in so I have little wins, right, throughout. And in the end, I have, but within them, I have flexibility to do my negotiation.
Right. Right. And you cut out for a second there, Josh, but I think what I'm hearing you say on the final point, and I know we're running short on time, but the final point about momentum is you have a direction. If you're moving in that direction for the right reasons, and you've engaged your stakeholders to get kind of the alignment and the definitions that you need to be useful, the way that you get there, you can pivot along different paths and still get to the results that you're aiming for. And the results might not be the exact skills-based framework that you started out with in your mind. But if you make sure that your tools, your compass, your map are correctly calibrated, and you stop to double check that as you go, you're going to end up in the place that was beneficial in the way that you intended at the beginning.
And be willing to change it when you
Yeah.
realize the script you wrote then is not the script you're on now.
Pivot. There's a whole meme for that. Okay, I know we are pretty much at time, so I'm going to skip over the last couple of things. I was hoping to grab some more time at the end here, but if you want to continue the conversation, we do have a quick link here that I'm going to put into chat. We'd be happy to just continue this conversation. Obviously, we love to talk. So you can grab the QR code on screen. Obviously, you will get the deck afterwards. You can grab it there as well. And I put the link into chat. So please do. Someone knows their friends, lore. Please do reach out to us, and we'd love to continue the conversation with you, whether it's about this or some other nerdy thing that we love to discuss. And it was really great conversation in the chat today. So happy that you all made it. And thank you for your amazing participation. Any closing thoughts, Josh and Scott?
Yeah, thanks, Ellen, for leading the charge.
We'll be at TICE speaking. So there you go.
Very cool.
Lovely. Well, yeah, that was a jam-packed session. I expect everybody's inbox to be blown up after this. So this was fantastic. And I will also see you all at TICE. So that kind of leads me into my next plug. But thank you guys so much. And honestly, all of our dynamic speakers today and our sponsors, Bridge, ELB Learning, GP Strategies, Interplay Learning, and Intrepid. And again, all of our sessions today are pre-qualified for a credit hour by SHRM, HRCI, ISPI, and CPTM. You're more than welcome to shoot an email at me or info@trainingindustry.com. We do certificates. I know that was a bigger question. They do cost. So just shoot me an email and I can send you all of that information today. But thank you to Plug TICE. I would love to meet you all in person here in Raleigh, North Carolina for the 2025 Training Industry Conference and Expo. So TICE is where learning leaders like you gathers to forge new professional connections, learn from each other, address their most pressing learning challenges, so you can re-energize your learning initiatives at TICE 2025 this summer. And we do have the early bird all the way through March, so definitely check it out. If you're also looking to elevate your L&D career and you don't want to necessarily come to Raleigh, North Carolina, less than 20% of organizations have optimized their diagnosed processes, so don't be a part of the statistics. Provide the right solution with the Training Needs Assessment Certificate and fill the gap between your programs and business goals. So one last reminder, that survey will pop open in another tab in your browser, and we would greatly appreciate all of your feedback. Thank you all for joining us again. Until next time, I am Liz. I hope you all have a fantastic day. Stay warm, and I will see you soon. Bye, everybody.